My name is Brady Mills. I'm ISRI's Director of Law Enforcement Outreach. And I have the pleasure of introducing Sergeant Todd Powell. Todd is the supervisor of the Anne Arundel County, Maryland Police Department's Metal Theft Task Force, Metal Theft Unit, excuse me. Todd's been with the department for 20 years. His assignments have included patrol, tactical, investigative, and training components. And then also, I really have to point out that Todd is also a member of ISRI's Law Enforcement Advisory Council. We have several of the other members in the audience here. Sergeant Powell's been a great resource for ISRI, have all the LEAC members. So without further from me, I'm going to go ahead and I'm sure you're going to take something out of this presentation on the good work that Todd and the unit's doing in Maryland. Thank you.
Good morning. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I don't think that's going to be an issue. I don't like standing behind a podium, so I'm going to move around a little bit. If you can't hear me, throw your hand up and I'll make an adjustment. Let me survey the audience first. How many people are, anybody from Canada? Canadian partners here? Okay, good. Scrap yards, recycling. I'm assuming that's the majority of the audience. What else do we have in the room? Catalytic converter buyers. Okay. I don't discriminate. We're going to talk about you. Anybody else? Yes. Trade press. Okay.
Security for scrapyard.
Security. Oh, great. I got a little thing I'm going to talk about there. Yes, sir.
Evaluation of metal trade as well.
Okay. Great. Great.
Used auto parts.
Used auto parts. Yes. Okay.
Software for scrapyards, which we also send all the data to police enforcement.
What company?
Scrapyard Pro.
Okay. All right. Yes, sir.
Security as well.
Security. Okay, good. We have a good sampling here. And at the end, I want to open this up and kind of hear from you. This is going to take some turns, and just bear with me because it'll all come together in the end. So I'm going to talk about what my unit does and why we exist, and how that relates to you in your part of the world. Anne Arundel County, Maryland. There are over 500,000 residents. We have about 650 officers on our department. We border the city of Baltimore to the south. Baltimore is the heroin capital of the United States of America. That is why I would say that we have a dedicated unit where we are. Baltimore County Police also has a dedicated unit for metal theft. So do some of the other surrounding agencies. We actually have a regional working group where we meet once a month and compare notes. We have the Chesapeake Bay to the east. Washington, D.C. is about 30 minutes away. We have a densely populated area in the northern part of our county, and we have farmland in the southern part of our county. So we have a pretty diverse population and makeup in our county. We have the largest mall in Maryland. We have Baltimore Washington International Airport. We have Fort Meade, which is the U.S. Cyber Command and also has the National Security Agency on the grounds. And we have the United States Naval Academy. So we're, what I say, a target-rich environment, unfortunately. As everybody in the room knows, materials prices, especially copper, escalated. That created a market for criminals, is what it did. And it created a theft problem. Well, it's an international theft problem. U.S. Department of Energy says they determine billions of dollars a year. Pipes, wires, cables, gutters being torn from structures. HVAC units being removed from businesses and homes. Construction materials, construction equipment, too. We have a battery theft problem. I'll talk about that in a little bit. As well as cell tower sites and electrical substations. So we have a critical infrastructure issue, and we also have a human safety issue in addition to a loss issue. Okay, for my friends in Canada, I pulled this up. The Canadian Electricity Association estimates copper theft to the electricity sector at $40 million a year since 2010. Hydro One estimates a loss of about $2 million a year due to copper theft, and that was published in August of 2014, so pretty recent data. Let me ask you this. If you're associated with a yard or a recycler, if you know this, because if you don't, you probably are, have you experienced a theft problem? Is that internal or external, or don't you know?
Both.
Both. Okay. Anybody else? If you have a yard, you're probably a victim of theft, and I'll tell you how I know this. My unit is, we do a lot of surveillance because it's not like the criminal breaks in your house and they steal your laptop that has a serial number and an IP address, and they take it somewhere and sell it where it's traceable. You know, they're stealing, or they're bringing to a yard a couple foot sections of copper, maybe some, whatever it is, whatever it once was, it is no more by the time it shows up at the yard, okay? We do a lot of surveillance. Well, during the process of surveillance on some of our targets, we've had them go to scrap yards, steal, and then take to another scrap yard and try to sell. Victim scrap yard not even knowing that problem was going on, okay? So they don't discriminate. They will steal from you just as easy as they will steal from anybody else. The materials theft problem is everywhere. And as I said, the aftermath, it does not only result in catastrophic loss for the victims, and I'll talk about more of that in some samples and some examples that I use. It creates a dangerous and deadly environment. There's the direct loss, and then there's the indirect loss. I'll give you an example. Major construction site. You know, everybody shows up in the morning to go to work. All the equipment has no batteries because they were stolen overnight. Okay, yeah, we have the physical loss of those batteries, but we have the loss of man hours. We have the project loss that basically shuts everything down until they can get that equipment up and running again. Businesses can't open. Homes cannot be sold if they're gutted. We see this a lot. Homes are gutted. Yeah, the pipes are gone, but the house is now flooded, and nobody's detected it. So now there's a mold issue, and again, catastrophic loss to a home that's on the market. So our agency, our mission has been to reduce crimes throughout the county, all right? Not just lock up bad guys, but it's all-encompassing. So our bosses came to us and said, fix the problem. You know, get it done. We're offender-based, so we identify targets through witnesses, you know, through crime scenes, known patterns, and various databases. And I'll talk about that in a little bit as well. If I'm going too fast, slow me down, because I like to roll. We conduct surveillance and make apprehensions. That's how we solve the majority of our cases. So let me break this down a little further. What are some initiatives that we do? Now, this is what we do. But again, don't just think of your individual place in the scrap industry. Don't think of just what your yard does or what your security feature does. Think about how you can take some ideas, because this is what we do. And I was fortunate enough to be part of the LEAC, and I took some ideas from ISRI and from the LEAC, and we plugged them into our own county. We have a prosecutor here, and he prepared a model case that I took to our prosecutors and educated them. That took the police educating the prosecutors. They're the attorneys. They're the ones with the law degrees. But it took that communication and that relationship to get things rolling in our county. So I cite these, and maybe it's not directly related to you, but think about maybe in your world how maybe you can bring some of these ideas to the forefront to get things rolling. We immediately began developing relationships with our scrap dealers. They previously did not exist, or if they did, they were probably negative relationships. We're police, we're soldiers. There's a problem overnight. The commander says, get down there to that scrap yard, and I want you to tear through there and look and find it and solve the problem. Well, we all know it's not that simple, okay? But the boss wants the problem fixed. And in the past, until we developed these relationships, and we put names with faces, and we had somebody we could call, we had somebody that could set stuff aside. That was negative, if anything. Now, it's very positive. It's like a marriage. It's always being worked on. We're always, but it's very important, and there's positive results that come out of those relationships. How many here, and I don't care, I've been doing this for 20 years, so my shell's pretty hard. How many here have a bad, and not personal, I don't want to hear about your personal lives and what you did or didn't do, but business with scrap have a negative relationship with your local police agency or maybe your state, provincial police, whatever? Nobody? Well, that's good. Things are getting better, because if I asked that question 5 years ago, it probably wouldn't have been the same response. We partnered with ISRI and their programs. I would hope that you are all familiar with these programs. most of you being ISRI members, but stop metals theft. If you utilize, and this can all be accessed from their main website. There is a component on here that has advice for prosecution. And there are a lot of things, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. There are a lot of tips here that we borrowed to bring back to our home to implement. And scrap theft alert. Again, all of our yards in our jurisdiction, as well as all of the investigators in our region, are signed up for scrap theft alert. We don't use this for every scrap theft because we have hundreds of them, but anything unique, significant, notable, anything like that, we will post it on scrap theft alert. So it has a good place. We developed infrastructure points of contact. One of the things that we found was, police bosses, they look at numbers. And we have a big theft problem. And a lot of our thefts are coming from our substations, our electrical substations, our cell tower sites. What, if anything, are the victims, the landlords, American Tower, the utilities, what are they doing to kind of harden up their sites or to try to detect any issues, video surveillance, monitoring, entry and exit, any of that kind of stuff. I will tell you where I am at, it's pretty much non-existent. So we develop points of contact. We maintain open lines of communication with them, and that has also brought about some changes in their industry and them initiating things to protect themselves. We have a ways to go, but it's a start, and it's working quite well. And we educated our state's attorney's office. Our prosecutors, in my opinion, are like police. If I don't know a lot about commercial motor vehicle law, if I don't know a lot about truck enforcement, I'm not going to stop trucks, okay? Prosecutors, if they are not familiar with the nuances of prosecuting a materials theft case, they're not going to touch it. Have any of you in the room ever been a victim or maybe been involved in the prosecution of a materials theft where, in your opinion, things didn't turn out the way you had hoped? Okay, and we have that's coming from a prosecutor. Do you want to talk about a specific example? Just in general?
Yeah, well, we bought about $30,000 worth of aluminum that turned out to be stolen in Louisiana. And we wanted police to stolen, it was originally stolen in New Orleans. We wanted the police department to stolen as well. They can't figure out how to prosecute, so we're trying to help them figure out how we can go after these guys criminally, civilly. I think it's a violent crime right now.
And that's all over the United States. I can't speak for Canada, but I know that that problem happens all over the United States. Anything else? Okay. Some of the things within the education also was feedback for us. Now, we have developed some protocols where if something goes to the yard, Baltimore Gas and Electric, for example, they're our local utility. Once grounding wire is cut up, it really has no use to them anymore because it now has to be spliced to be reintroduced. Well, that's not worth it to them. It's just not going to work. So they actually will let the yard keep the evidence. Okay? Air conditioning units, that's a big problem in our jurisdiction. A lot of times we will just take a fragment of the air conditioning unit where the coil's connected to the rest of the equipment, and we'll take that for a fracture exam, but the rest we'll let the yard keep it. Of course, that's with the victim. It's ultimately the victim's property, but the victim has no use for that anymore. So the yard does not, in a lot of our cases, suffer a great loss. And if and when they do, we charge their victim named in the complaint as well so that we can look to get restitution for them. Now, it's not always going to happen, but we have to do our job in law enforcement to keep that relationship and to try. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. We use photos for our evidence. So we take pictures at the yard, but most of the stuff we just let go through. Again, those are things that we have worked out. That's not going to happen everywhere. but it's stuff that through open dialogue and through good partnerships we were able to develop. Standby. That means standby for testimony for court. We have it worked out with our state's attorney's office that in the majority of our cases, because they usually end in a plea, that our yard representatives, unless they drop the ball and don't show up when needed or what have you, they're placed on standby for court. So we call them if we need them, but we don't have to take them out of the office unless we have to. Okay? And that's something that they love. Okay? But they have their end of the deal to come when and if needed. We educated our own people on the problem and how to successfully investigate. We put out public service announcements to get our local community involved, mainly with prevention methods, marking their materials, making their property traceable. Now again, that doesn't always work because sometimes the thief will go in behind and destroy that. But again, we have to try. Not just our individuals, but our businesses. There's a lot they can do on their end to protect their assets. We developed a regional working group, like I talked about. And as part of that, we have our utilities involved in that working group as well, and their investigators. And then we have our unit members certified as experts in some areas so that we can put a detective on the stand and they can testify to the makeup of an air conditioning unit. Okay, in our county, last year we had over 500 reported materials thefts. I have 5 detectives, so that's 100 cases for each detective. As you can see, we have a lot of work on our plate. I would venture to say that it's the same in your local area. Whether they're assigned to an investigator or not, I'm sure it's a significant problem. We made 125 arrests. Many are repeat offenders because, as you said, property crimes, they're not treated in the courts, generally speaking, as violent crimes. And our offenders will, we'll still be in the station doing the paperwork. They're back out on the street. We had one individual, we arrested him 8 times in 3 months. Finally got him locked up. And imagine this, our theft problem slowed down. Almost every one of our offenders, about 97% of the people we arrest, have an opiate addiction. Okay? That may start as a prescription pill problem that then on the East Coast, and especially in the Baltimore area, turns into a heroin problem because it's cheaper. On the West Coast, it might be crystal meth. But those, and that's why it's such a problem in our area. That's something that, again, we as a community need to work on because that goes way beyond law enforcement and way beyond prosecution. And our unit last year recovered over $300,000 in assets. Yes, sir? 125 arrests. We made convictions in every case last year. Yeah, now some of those arrests are open warrants because, again, these people have a habitual theft problem, so they're not just stealing scrap materials. They may have a fail to appear in court. They may have another theft charge. But of the ones that we arrested, we had a 100% conviction rate last year. But that's because we put the time and the effort and the energy into it. Okay, I'm going to give you some examples, kind of sampling across the board. 16 air conditioning coils were stolen from the roof of a business, resulting in all these examples are from my jurisdiction last year. They resulted in a theft of $68,000. We reviewed video surveillance and determined that 2 suspects cut the coils, bent them flat, and dropped them to the ground. We developed them and apprehended them. Basically, again, we knew they did it. We couldn't prove it. We had to go watch them and wait for them to hit again. We watched them one night overnight do the same type of a burglary in Baltimore City. We apprehended them in Baltimore City with the help of Baltimore City Police, and then were able to charge them based on circumstantial evidence in our case. And I'm going to show you a video, some surveillance video, spice it up a little bit, but I will tell you they were both convicted. They were each ordered $18,000 restitution, and they're both serving 4 years in jail. And that's for a property crime. Okay, so you're going to see our two individuals. They're carrying a collapsible ladder. Can everybody see this? And they're getting ready to get up on the rooftop. This is a time-lapsed, it's a motion-activated time-lapse surveillance system, so things jump around a little bit. All right, now our friends are up on the roof. This is a rooftop. So some businesses now have, good question, rooftop surveillance systems because this is such a prevalent problem in our area. Security people, maybe you can talk about that later. I don't know. But the AC coils, they're piling them up right here. And now they're starting to move them over to the edge of the roof. And I'll show you throwing them down here on the next video. And as you can see, they're masked up. We never brought up the camera system in the interview because we didn't want them to know that it existed. But they never alluded to it, so I don't think they were aware that there was a surveillance system until their attorneys got it for discovery. Now, how this ties in, the striped sweatshirt was the exact same sweatshirt that we have the one individual wearing at the scrapyard when he conducted the transaction. That winter hat that this suspect's wearing, he was wearing that same hat at the scrapyard. So that was one piece of a lot of pieces of circumstantial evidence.
Guys working pretty hard.
If you look at the timestamps, they were on the rooftop for 2 hours. 2 hours. And this next one's my favorite. If you look right over in this area, it's going to start raining coils. This particular place, that was the first time. Yeah. Yeah, we just got lucky. Yep.
This was the one that was in your jurisdiction?
Correct. Mm-hmm. And this, if you look through the tree line here, you see the cars going by? That's the Baltimore-Washington Parkway. It's a corridor that runs from D.C. to Baltimore. What they ultimately did was they drug the coils over into the woods here, and then they obviously parked on the parkway and loaded their vehicle up over there because they're never seen loading up on the surveillance system.
Is this area lighted, or is it that infrared camera?
Just regular lighting. It's not anything other than the normal street lighting. So yes, it's an infrared system.
And these were not monitored cameras?
Correct. We did not find this until we went back and did the follow-up investigation. Well, I can't get it full screen, but thank you. Okay, thank you. Teamwork. And this shows a little ingenuity on behalf of the suspects. 4 steel custom-made I-beams were taken from a highway project, the Baltimore Beltway. Part of that goes through our jurisdiction. Stolen beams were valued at approximately $7,800. Since they were custom-made, they would have to be remade. The company installing them and working on the project was from out of town, so they would have to relocate their employees and bring them back at a later time. So on and so forth. You could see the significant financial impact as a result of these 4 I-beams being stolen. And what did they get at the scrapyard? One scrapyard paid $94 for 2 beams, and they took the other 2 beams to another scrapyard, and they received $76. Okay? Why do suspects go to 2 different scrapyards? Well, obviously, if we make our phone call and we're calling looking for 4 I-beams, you know, that's a little bit easy for us. So they're smart enough to manage and move around a little bit. Okay? They do that all the time. You know, police work is like cat and mouse. You know, as soon as we adapt to one tactic, they'll switch their tactics. Catalytic converters. We began in Maryland, and I'll talk about this in a minute. Converters, to bring into a processor or a yard, it has to be a business-to-business transaction. That didn't stop people from starting underground operations where they bought converters on the street and then shipped them out of state. We developed a suspect who was purchasing converters, and we did a search warrant at his residence, and we recovered 900 converters from his basement.
Steve, you want to add anything to that or a comment?
We're seeing that a lot. We developed laws in a number of states, again, to restrict the ability to sell those converters unless if they're attached to the vehicle or they're sold business-to-business type of transaction. It still doesn't fix everything, as you pointed out.
Right.
But we're hoping that that's going to help some. The question is, how did you develop that suspect? Was he advertising?
Well,
was he ads in Craigslist, as an example?
No. It was all through arrests that we kind of worked. You know, our cases kind of work like drug cases where, you know, we make a low-level arrest, we develop information, and it leads to other things. This particular suspect used to own a core business. It went out of business, and he started operating underground. And we had heard about things, so it wasn't surprising when we made a few arrests and this information came to us, but it took that to kind of get the ball rolling.
We have seen some folks under the guise of buying cores, and they're buying scrap converters.
Yeah.
Converters are retail.
Yep. Yep. Yes, ma'am.
How much is that catalytic converter worth?
Well, what's it worth to a buyer, or what's this? I'll give you an example right here. This is from a park and ride right off the Beltway. We actually got lucky and caught the suspects in the middle of the act. He literally had the saw in his hands when we moved in. This is a 2014 Toyota Highlander that belonged to an FBI employee who commuted to Washington, D.C. I believe her bill was $8,000 when, of course, insurance covered it, but that was an $8,000 loss because once it's cut from the exhaust system, it renders the whole system inoperative, and they have to install more than just a new converter.
As scrap, though, that's probably, what, $75?
Yeah. Yeah. Our underground guy was paying, depending on what, you know, what brand and what type of converter, $50. Good one would be $75. Yeah. Okay, battery thefts from construction equipment at job sites throughout the county. Our county's growing. There's a lot of construction. Creates a problem for us. We developed a male suspect, and this is why it's good to have regional contacts, because it's a regional problem. We made everyone in our region aware of our problem and our target, and started conducting joint surveillance on our target. He was stealing in our jurisdiction. Another jurisdiction's surveillance team picked him up one night, and they watched him commit a theft in yet another jurisdiction. Okay? They know no boundaries. 3 days later, of course, he's back out on the street that afternoon. 3 days later, while under surveillance, he's arrested committing another theft. Okay? He's finally incarcerated because not only was he committing the thefts, he was violating his probation. I show this as an example. This is, again, from an actual case of ours last year. Battery cables at a yard. Why would we want to bring a battery in with cut cables? If you or I were going to transfer our battery out, we wouldn't cut the cables. We would disconnect the cables and connect them to a new battery. This is where we ask the yards to help us out. If somebody's bringing that stuff in our business, we call that a clue. Okay? This is where the marriage and the partnership, has to work. Okay? Because if we have to find that out the hard way, then obviously we're going to have some questions for the yard. Now, again, this is another part of the relationship. We ask our yards to go ahead and buy that, go ahead and conduct that transaction. Because if they chase the thief away, now we don't have a documented record of that person trying, unless they actually physically know that person, which usually they don't. We don't have a record of that person with that property. That's something state to state, county to county, jurisdiction to jurisdiction you're going to have to work out. But that's part of our relationship and part of our communication that we keep. Romex wire stolen from numerous houses under construction. We developed suspects and went up on surveillance. As we're watching, our targets are at 2 different residences. As we're watching one residence, it looks like they're dealing drugs out of the house. That escalated into a search warrant, not only for our case and some of the evidence we were looking for, but also turned into a narcotics case. Once that case kind of dug in and got rolling, that led to a bigger narcotics case. So again, it's just us communicating with other parts of our agency too. Due to ongoing thefts, we had a spike in our cell tower thefts. And again, we began investigating a male suspect. He recently was scrapping bus bars at one of our yards who says that they don't buy bus bars. Okay? Not a fault of management. And here's another thing. The manager may have the best intentions. The owner of the yard may have the best intentions. But if that's not being communicated to the person at the scale, the person conducting the transaction, then it's a loss. Okay? And that's what happened in this case. There's no harm intended, but harm was actually occurring. We were able to arrest that suspect. The next slide is a picture of the trunk of his vehicle, if you can't recognize it as a trunk. But you can see all the wire, again, that was cut, just like in the battery cases. In this case, our suspect told us he had a pill addiction. Okay? He was a higher level suspect. He drove a BMW, so he had a pill problem. And again, you can see the wires attached to the bus bars. Okay. Yes, sir?
You found that a lot of your perpetrators in the cell tower stuff were either current, former contractors and stuff like that?
Great question. So once we made this arrest, we found out that he had a prior arrest in the Richmond, Virginia area. Well, in that case, he was a tower climber for a company that was contracted to Sprint. And they actually, some of the other employees had said that he was stealing from the sites. The police showed up, and in his hotel room, where he was for his job, were a bunch of bus bars. He was arrested. Then we began our surveillance, and we learned this. So yes, a lot of the HVAC thefts, the air conditioning, a lot of the utilities thefts, a lot of the underground wire thefts, a lot of the cell tower site thefts are all somebody who maybe was formerly into business, subcontractor, something along those lines. They develop a drug problem in most cases, and it leads to this. It leads to the theft problem. All right, real quick, I'm going to buzz through this just to help our conversation later on. I'll tell you what the laws are in Maryland because, as we all know, every state it's different. So I'll tell you how it works in our world. In Maryland, scrap yards are open to inspection by police, the local police, during business hours. In Maryland, The only thing that has to be held by a yard is a historic plaque or marker, and that must be held for 30 days, and law enforcement must be notified. Anything else in the scrap world, it comes in and it goes out whenever their shipping day is. There's no law enforcement hold. Some things that cannot be individual to yard. It has to be business to business. In Maryland, metal bleachers, we had a problem with bleachers being stolen from our high school stadiums throughout the state, so that's why that was enacted. Hard-drawn copper, beer kegs, cemetery urns. We had a big problem with the brass urns in our cemeteries. Grave markers, and that law has actually basically eliminated that problem, I will say. Grave markers, same thing. That's pretty much been eliminated from our theft problem. Articles owned by a public utility for obvious reasons. Guardrails, manhole covers, tree grates, metal light poles, water meters, street signs, propane tanks. And then I had catalytic converters up there in red because that was added. It's a 2008 law. It was added in 2011. And it basically eliminated our catalytic converter theft problem, except for a few of these underground operations that popped up in Maryland. Any questions on that before I move? The businesses in Maryland are required to report the date and the time of the purchase, the description of the junk or scrap metal purchased, and that's what the law says right there. So that's very open for interpretation. If the payment's based on weight and exceeds $500, it must be reported as over $500 transaction. License plate number of any vehicle used by the individual from whom the junk scrap is acquired. That's not, and this is where we have some issues as well, that's not the license plate that they had on their car the first time they came into the yard 2 years ago and conducted a transaction. That's the license plate they had on the car this date today. There's a reason behind that. I can think one of our recent arrests last month, our suspect was using a rental car. Okay? Month before that, he was using his parents' car, okay, until he was no longer allowed to use it. Month before that, he was using his own car, which was ultimately repossessed. Okay? So you can see why that information is being asked, because those things change day to day, transaction to transaction. Yeah. To this, yes. Well, it's to a state database, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Yep. The name and the current address, not mom and dad's address where they lived 2 years ago. Okay, current address. And I bring these points up because a lot of times they scan the license and they take it as gospel, and that's not always the case. It requires a question as to what their current address is. Their personal information from some type of a state ID, and then in Maryland, an electronic scan or photocopy of their state ID used during that particular transaction, not 2 years ago. Why do we need all this? Okay? Our burden is in law enforcement and the state's attorneys, they have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that that person committed that theft on that day from that location. That's a lot. That's a lot. In each jurisdiction, your prosecutors will look at things a little bit differently. But ours requires the record from the business. So yes, the yard reports to a database that law enforcement has access to, but when we actually prosecute a case, we have to go to the yard and get the actual transaction record. Okay? Our prosecutors want the person who conducted that transaction as the witness. In Baltimore County, next door to us, whoever certifies the records for that scrapyard, that's the witness. So again, that varies even jurisdiction to jurisdiction. Things that are all good to know, no matter what your role is in this whole equation. What good records and good prosecution and good circumstantial evidence equals is a good case, which equals a plea, which means that you don't have to sit all afternoon on a witness stand being grilled about your business records and your processes and why you didn't have the correct tag number for the car that that person came in that day in your transaction, etc. So maybe if you can understand kind of the whys, then it helps make all of our lives a little bit easier in the long run. As I said earlier, we can use photographs for prosecution in most of our cases. I don't need to drag that steel I-beam down the center of the courtroom floor. We just need to photograph it and document it. Again, that's going to vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. Again, that often allows the immediate return of property to either the victim or to allow the yard to keep that piece of property, depending on the case. The I-beams, they went back to where they belonged because they could be reused and they could be moving that project along. As I said earlier as well, we will charge the suspect on behalf of the dealer because they sustain a loss too. And I will tell you, and this comes with education, and hopefully we can fix this over time, we have some judges in our jurisdiction, not all, not most, but some, who say that's a cost of doing business and I am not going to order restitution to the yard. Okay? That's something that hopefully not just us, but good efforts by our yards, that will be fixed over time. I mean, face it, you're still a victim. If you look at the legal definition of theft, you're still a victim by being deceived. These are some coils. This is actually from a 2015 case. This was in March, so this is pretty fresh. This is from a strip plaza in our jurisdiction. These are what was brought into the scrapyard. And if you notice the form there, that's what you see. This is what we see. This is what's left at the scene. So some suspects will dismantle at the scene. Some suspects will steal the entire unit. This is a church where, again, they just took the coils. And our offenders, they know no boundaries. They'll steal from anybody and everybody. Schools, churches, brand new residence that has not yet been, just finished construction, has not yet been sold. Second time the AC units were installed and they were stolen. Okay, so the contractor's at a loss yet again. We made an arrest in this case. But in this particular case, the entire units were stolen. Cell tower batteries. Again, our yards, if these batteries are coming in and somebody's coming in, your yard people know. They know when something's not right. If these are coming in, somebody not representing themselves as a business, why do they have them? How do they have them? That's something where we expect a phone call, again, as part of our good relationship, because something's not right. This is from Pepco Electric, which is another public utility in our area. A former employee, again, we have that connection, knew where they stored spools of wire in one of their substations in Washington, D.C., broke into the substation overnight. D.C. police didn't really want to do much on their end to follow up because they didn't think they had the makings of a good case. This was recovered in our jurisdiction under a tarp after we had developed some information. It led us there. And as you can see, the suspects, they would cut sections at a time and take it into the yard. Little bits and pieces, okay, from a bigger picture, a bigger problem. We were able to prosecute for receiving stolen property in our jurisdiction. I'll put a little public safety side to this. On August 3rd, 2014, at approximately 5:22 in the morning, an explosion occurred at a Baltimore Gas and Electric substation in northern Anne Arundel County in our jurisdiction. Over 10,000 residents in the Linthicum area lost power immediately. BWI Airport lost power until their generators kicked in. The Maryland Transportation Authority Police, who is responsible for protecting BWI Airport, it knocked out their communications center. Okay? Investigation revealed that the suspects broke into the facility. They climbed the structure. I'll show you why in a second. But Baltimore Gas and Electric has painted a lot of their ground-level grounding wire a bright green. They then went to the scrap yards and said, if anybody brings this stuff in, please let us know. It is stolen. It is not theirs. It is ours. So what do suspects do? Well, if the ground is green, we're going up. Okay? The employees and the investigators on behalf of the Gas and Electric believe that they used a bucket truck because that's the only explanation they have as to why somebody wasn't killed in this particular theft. 80 feet of copper. You knock out an airport, 10,000 homes, and a police communications center for 80 feet of copper. The value of the stolen copper was $240. Can you see where I'm going with the significant impact of more than $240 in this particular example? This is the painted wire I was referring to in the lower part of their substations. And then if you can see, like right here, some of the cut grounding wire from the upper levels of the substation. Okay. I'd like to open it up now, and please don't beat me up because I know I'm law enforcement and I'm used to that, but let's talk. Yes, sir.
You showed some pictures of like a new construction where the entire air conditioning unit was stolen. Have any of your investigations ever determined that they're selling those to HVAC contractors to be reinstalled and not used for scrap metal?
No. No. And that's not to say that day's not going to come, but we have not yet had a case that led us there. Now, my unit has only been in existence for about a year, a little over a year now. Before that, and this is just being part of the LEAC and talking to my colleagues in other jurisdictions, most police agencies will have a detective that maybe catches a variety of cases investigating these crimes. We have a dedicated unit because it's such a problem where we are, and also, like I said, we have to conduct surveillance to make our arrests. One person cannot safely and effectively conduct surveillance. So I'll preface it with that. But with all the cases we've had, we have not yet seen that. Yes, sir, in the back.
Seems like this stuff always happens when I'm out of town, but yesterday one of the companies in our hometown called our yard and said there's some copper sheeting stolen. We looked around, yeah, in fact, we had gotten it earlier in the day, contacted the police. They're investigating that now. The question is, how do we handle it if this guy shows up again with material? Do we take it? And I'm waiting for a call from the detective. But in general, if there's something suspicious or we identify some material that some private individual called us about, do you recommend taking it or rejecting it?
That's a great question. Anybody hear that? Everybody get a chance to hear that? That, again, that comes two things. Obviously, it's case specific. So what does your local agency want to do with this individual, related to this case? But also, that's where you should have a contact person at your local police agency. My unit will tell our yards, keep conducting business as usual. Thank you for the information. Keep conducting business as usual until or unless we ask you to stop. But again, that allows us a lot of times to build a bigger case because it shows a pattern of behavior, if that makes sense. We charge people with an overall scheme if they're involved in multiple thefts. So I don't want to answer directly, but I know my people will say continue conducting business because the last thing they want to know is that somebody's looking into them. That might disrupt an entire case investigation. Yes, sir.
I'm not sure if you've encountered this before, but when you've asked the yards to do that, and then the actual owner of the material wants to recover it, oftentimes the scrapyard is out the money that they've paid to cooperate with the investigation.
Yep.
Have you run into that, and how did you deal with that?
Yeah, we deal with that on a number of different ways, and this is, again, going to be, town to town, agency to agency. We speak to the victim and kind of explain to them why, in most cases, that property is no good to them, okay? And we let it, we'll let that go through with the yard. But there are times when the yard's out, whatever, they're out. And that's when we either charge on their behalf or and try to get some restitution back to the yard. Or at times we can use some other funds, some reward money, things like that, because in essence they help facilitate our investigation. Okay, so there's a variety of answers to that question, but we always try to make something work. Again, it's a relationship. We're always trying to make things work,
Have you had much success with restitution?
Yes and no. We've had success with court-ordered restitution, but because of a lot of our suspects are heroin addicts, when that restitution gets paid back, I don't know. But I like having that hung over their heads. It's probably why I do what I do. But if somebody works hard for something and somebody takes it, to me, there should be no pass on that. I don't care if you have to pay 5 years from now, but at some point in your life, you're due to repay that debt. Yes.
You mentioned your reporting system.
Yes.
And it's a state-operated system.
Okay. Yeah, I said I'd come back to that, but yes, go ahead.
Please elaborate.
Okay.
And state-operated as opposed to some of the private.
Yeah, well, it's a hybrid system in Maryland. The Maryland State Police, it's called the RAPID system in Maryland. Regional Automated Pawn, and it's combined with the pawn records as well. Information database. Maryland State Police oversees that system. But it's actually a company, a Canadian company, BWI Incorporated. It's their software. It's their product. So they actually, get the yards up and running with the software and everything. And then Maryland State Police just oversees it for compliance. And this is another good point. One of our yards called me a couple weeks ago where they upgraded their computer system, but it's not, their scanner that was sold to them by this vendor does not integrate with their current computer system. The vendor doesn't have an answer. Well, that's unacceptable. There's a law that says they have to report. They're too small. They cannot hire somebody to do manual data entry, so they depend on that scanner to populate all the fields in the entry. I couldn't agree with them more. So I called the state police and let it be known that you have to come up with this. That's something that if they are the facilitator for the state of Maryland, there has to be a solution there. And that's one.
Holding the vendor account.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Who owns the data?
The state owns the data.
So
Yeah.
it cannot be reused by the vendor for any purpose, correct?
Correct. And this is another kind of byproduct. If I'm Joe of Joe and Sons Air Conditioning, and I think one of my employees is stealing from me, and I go down to the scrap yard and I want to know if the yard doesn't know without querying that database. Those records are just like banking records. They are sealed. Okay. So the yard, and this is part of our relationship, will have them call us. And we will investigate. We're not going to give that data out, but we will investigate to see if there may be an issue there. And then we'll get back with the Joe and tell him, you might want to start looking at this employee.
Who pays for the database and services? The yard?
The yards pay for the database and services. The state maintains the server and all those costs, but the yard pays for the software. Yep, and that's part of their licensing. Yes, sir.
Can you tell us a little bit more internally how you use that database? Is it only in circumstances where you're looking for a particular individual or somebody reviewing it daily, and has it led to any arrests?
It absolutely leads to a majority of our arrests. And I know that's an issue that gets asked. And every year, we use case examples that we provide to the state police, as do other agencies in Maryland, that then they give to the legislature for review, as they review the laws every year. It's used in a number of ways. If a name comes up in an investigation, we can query that name in the database, and we see, whoa, they're coming to the scrapyard every day. We run them through Maryland wage records, and we see that they don't have a job. Well, then what's going on here? We have an issue. So it kind of allows us to direct our attention. Where there's smoke, there's fire. That allows us to direct our attention to a particular subject. Also, if we have a particular theft overnight or something along those lines, we'll check the database the next day to see if anything matching. And again, that's open for interpretation. But if we can find any close matches that may develop a suspect that we should be looking at that we're not already looking at. We use it in a variety of different ways, but we use it every day. Yep. Yes, sir.
One of the things we've done is being on the software side of things. We've actually worked with, the police force as well as the scrap yards to kind of come up with the best mixture of everything. What I want to ask you is we actually invented a technology where we recognize the customer with a biometric fingerprint. So when that guy comes and sells his product, you can have a fake ID. You cannot have a fake biometric signature. Once you put that in, it pulls the customer information. So what else could we do to make it even more sealed, where you have a case, you guarantee, because we can practice and demonstrate that you get that guy's thumbprint, I'm going to show you that guy is the guy it is. It's going to pull up the information, because they can't say, hey, I was wearing a baseball cap. They can do all those different things.
Right.
But once you recognize him by biometric, there's no getting out of that. You were there that day. It's stamped.
Right.
You were there at 11 o'clock on Friday, whatever, the 15th. You see what I mean? So what else can we do to even make it easier for you from a software side? So it's easy. It's good for our for recyclers as well as the police force. What else could we do to make it so easy for you when you walk in the courtroom? You got it. Yeah, well, with that, it just comes, we would need an expert to testify to that fingerprint hit. So I don't know if that's something the company provides, or I don't know if that's something one of our does it actually capture that print that could be forensically compared by one of our examiners? It's actually, I can take you in the system, you put your finger 5 times, and then it will recognize it, pull your information up. You could do it anywhere. I could do it to anybody. The system works every time. Right. Fred, do you have an answer to that? Because if I go into a yard and I put my thumbprint in, and you have to register them once. Once you register them, then we have the thumbprint. So I could register at a vendor, though, at a scrapyard, right? So if I'm a scrapyard, first time you're doing business with me, you register the customer. When you register them, you have the option to biometrically get their signature. If you get that signature one time, that person can come up, they can put their thumb, it will pull all the information. You still got to make sure that license address is, the car's tag is, you still got to measure all that. But at least as a fact, he did scan his thumbprint, and that is the guy, because there's nobody else. It will pull it up, and it just stamps it in the system. Right. So you could send it to any law enforcement or whatever. So we all know that that's the guy, okay? But this is where our job is hard. Will that hold up in court without some type of a... Fred's a prosecutor.
Just like APIS does, which I'm sure you're familiar with. But I think that gives us a suspect. We go capture the suspect, and we can do other identification procedures, as well as taking the fingerprint. I assume it captures it on that particular event, right? So it's not just that transaction.
It actually recognizes it.
That part I don't need. Sure. What I need is it captured on the day that it's sold. Yeah. Then we take that fingerprint and we can have his fingerprint examiners compare it, and then you've got an identification for that particular event.
And I will tell you again, that's gonna change state to state, province to province, town to town, because do they have a fingerprint examiner on their staff that can do a timely comparison before a court date rolls around? So it's...
Well, the system does it electronically. It's actually a government-approved ID by FBI.
Right.
We just wrote the software to be able to do that, and software does it for you. That's
right.
Really...
Yeah, but an expert has to go on the witness stand and testify to that. So that would either be a company-provided expert that's accepted by the courts, or a police department employed fingerprint examiner. That's where that all comes into play. So that's part of that equation. We have a set of twin brothers who are doing battery thefts right now. Well, one of them's in jail. But guess what? He just conducted a scrap transaction last week. His twin brother's using his identification. So, that would be great in a situation like that, because it makes our job a lot easier. But there's the whole backing it up with testimony that comes along with that.
What else could we do to make it even better? Is there anything else we could do that when you guys prosecute them, it's almost like nothing. Yeah. You guarantee you nail them every time.
I mean, the more the better with us. I mean, it's the terms are endless. Photographs or digital surveillance of vehicles, to include, snapshots of motor vehicle plates like tags or tag reader software, pictures of individuals, pictures of the materials. A lot of our yards have the material on the scale, which is very helpful to us. Things along those lines. I mean, it's endless possibilities with technology, but we have to be able to put experts to back that up in court. Yes, sir.
You mentioned earlier about photographic evidence being used. What about video evidence?
Yes.
We've had people from our company help testify.
Yes.
Experts that say, hey, here's the video, here's what it.
Yeah, so again, that's going to vary jurisdiction to jurisdiction, but what our prosecutors ask for is, with photographs and with video, somebody just needs to testify that that is the actual video from that day at that time. So sometimes that's going to require an employee, or often it can just require the detective or the officer or the investigator watching that on your system, then capturing that and entering it as evidence. So they can testify to that's exactly what I pulled off of that system. That's something that we always like to work that out on the front end. So in your local jurisdiction or whatever areas, whatever areas where your product is, that's something that your local law enforcement has to work out with their prosecutors. Generally the same, though. Somebody just needs to say that that's a true depiction of the events that happened on that day.
And in some states, just so they know, you may not have to testify at all in the preliminary hearing. The officer can testify to what you told him.
Right.
California.
Yes.
So, and like Todd said, a lot of these cases are disposed of before it actually goes to court. So you may never have to testify.
Right. Good things on the front end lead to good things on the back end. And it saves a lot of people time, effort, and energy if we can put together good cases.
Because if the person from the yard doesn't have to use their time with all this investigation stuff, then...
That keeps our marriage working. Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say. And
The question you mentioned earlier about someone coming in, selling through your guys' system, database, that sell them every day, and then go see that they're unemployed.
Right.
Do you guys also link that into employment welfare, everything else that my tax dollars be able to provide for these people that they're just crooks and thieves going out there stealing all day anyways? And then bring up, not only a mental theft charge, but a fraud charge against welfare.
Well, yes and no. We do that in some cases where it's obvious. All we can do is pass that data along to the appropriate investigators. The gentleman operating the 900 catalytic converters in his basement, underground operation out of his residence. We got the IRS involved. We got the Maryland Comptroller's Office involved. We got the fire marshal involved. We got our local code enforcement involved. We called everybody we could think of because this guy is just not, and he's hurting the honest businessman. That's how I see it, businesswoman. And to date, and those search warrants were executed back in September of 2014, to date, no other action other than our action has been taken against this individual. So we try, but we can only do as much as we can do in our world. Hopefully going forward, those things will get better. And it's a lot about education. ISRI talks about this. The LEAC talks about this. It's getting everybody on the same page and understanding that there's a problem. And then, okay, hey, what can we do together to help fix this problem? That's the name of the game, is communication and education. Yes, sir.
There's a variety of ways of prosecuting people. We had the Social Security Administration come in one day because this guy was on SSI disability payments and scrapping every day. He's in jail now because of that.
Yeah, and that's
Years
good.
of it.
Yeah. Yeah, and because SSI has terms, and usually you can't, he's basically operating a scrap business.
Yep.
And he shouldn't be doing that if he's on, full-time assistance. Yeah. Yes, sir.
So I was a little disappointed when you said the judges don't think that restitution should apply and that the operator should just have that included in their business model.
Right. Not most judges, some judges.
Yeah, I got that. All right. But to that end, so our business is in Alaska. Everything that is generated there leaves the state. There's no additional processing. So do any of these cases bubble up to a federal level? Because not only is it crossing state lines, but it's actually the material's crossing international waters to get to Washington State.
Right.
So do the feds get involved, and does that help sink some teeth into the penalty?
Yeah, we were just talking about this recently as well. That, from what I hear, it's a problem in our area to get the U.S. Attorney's Office to take a case. And I'm hearing that's a problem throughout the United States. They need high dollar thresholds. High dollar thresholds for them to even take an interest. Again, with communication and education, and the squeaky wheel gets the grease, we're going to keep calling. And it's one of our departmental goals is to solve the metal theft problem. Well, if it's that big of a problem in our department and in our county of over 500,000 people, shouldn't somebody take an interest in some of these cases? And it's a process, but I hope that we'll have some positive results going forward. So I would imagine it's the same in your neck of the woods. I would just, maintain contact with your federal, your U.S. Attorney's Office in Alaska, and maybe your FBI office, your local FBI office, and just kind of, bring these things up from time to time so they realize it's not a one-time problem, it's an all-the-time problem, and maybe you'll have some positive results. Good luck. Yes.
We have a common question at ISRI that comes in with regards to electronic record keeping, and that is whether or not they should have to report the price that they paid the customer when the customer came in, along with all these other records. Pricing obviously being a proprietary issue, a competitive issue, and then going into a privately owned database where there's breaches happening every other day. It's huge. So should that money and the pricing get out into the public realm, it could devastate or even shut down a smaller dealer. But yet in state laws, we commonly have law enforcement requesting in law that the price being paid should be included in the reporting. Is that truly of value to law enforcement to have the price of the material in that record keeping, and what's the value of that if there is?
Well, is that local, is that being generated from local law enforcement?
Correct. Local, all these laws have started from the local law enforcement level, but now all 50 states have laws. And in the legislature debates, there are debates now on what should be reported, including pricing. And for example, in Florida state, the recycling industry collectively came together and convinced the legislature and law enforcement that the prices were not needed for investigations. Right. And then they conceded to report their other data because they felt it a little safer. But in other states, they have not, and the pricing of each transaction is required to be reported along with who is selling. And that becomes a very sensitive issue. And the question is that piece of information that essential to criminal investigation to law enforcement? And if so, why?
So there's no easy answer to that question, but I'll tell you from my little piece of the world, we don't really take a position on that in our agency. I would imagine that because price is compared to weight, that maybe that's what's generating those requests, I guess. And maybe that's what they want there. But in Maryland, it's anything over $500, they just need to report the total amount of the transaction. That's it. Anything less than that does not need to be reported. I will tell you in our cases, that's not a deal breaker. That is nice to know in certain situations, but that's not something that we would stand down at the state legislature and demand in Maryland.
Hey, Todd?
Yes.
I think we're getting short. I think maybe one more.
Okay.
I know Mr. Cook's been...
Oh, yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, thank you. This is a wine and shameless plug. We just had a scrap theft law passed 2 years ago in Washington State. And not a lot has changed because the legislature didn't fund the law enforcement function. Yeah. And so we've got our local cops, God bless them, but they've got a lot to do. And it's an emergency where everything's bleeding and they're running around all over the place trying to do stuff. so, I guess my question is, Daniel, you back there, forgive me, do you, or someone like you, do they go to the National Council of State Legislatures annual meeting, give the information that you've given? With the obvious intent of, gee, you should fund the law enforcement portions of these scrap theft laws.
Yeah, well, that's a great question.
It's in August in Seattle. That's my shameless plug.
So, you know, agencies have to actually track this. You know, this is a topic that's discussed on the LEAC at ISRI. Agencies actually have to track this to really be able to tell whether there's a problem or not. And like, police departments are required every year to report local data to the FBI. You know, homicides, robberies. Metal theft is not one of those criteria. So unless individual police agencies take it upon themselves to start measuring that data, nobody's going to have those answers.
I guess what I'm trying to say is maybe we should try another way to convince the legislatures that these guys stealing catalytic converters or air conditioning units are not just stealing those things. They're probably stealing lots of other things.
Right.
And, you know, the legislatures pass these laws, okay, we did our job, we're heroes, but they don't go the next step.
I couldn't agree with you more. I've been a cop for 20 years, and I've seen that a million times. The sex offender registries, where they pass laws, but they don't give us the resources to investigate or follow up on them. And I could name 100 examples. So, yes, it is, and it comes back to education. So if you can find the right people to educate, you know, that body, then sure. I mean, that's a great idea. Maybe throw it back on them and ask them for data and see what they have to say.
Hey, Sarge?
Yes, sir.
To end this conversation, answer the young lady's question back here. It may be that somebody is mixing up the value of that property so that you, the Sarge, or you, the police department, can get the proper charge versus what they are trying to get the value of what the scrap metal wants.
Right. I
mean, they're asking for a price, and it may be 10 cents on the dollar of the value. When you got to charge somebody on a felony conviction and it's $500 or $1,000 or $2,000,
right.
They may be mixing those two
So
together.
yeah, maybe that's a misintended law. So when we go to charge somebody, each state has statutes. You know, was the theft range the loss between, you know, 1,000 and 10,000, 10,000 to 100,000, what have you? Well, like we had in the steel I-beam, $7,800 worth of I-beams sold for less than $200. There's obviously a difference there. So if that was the point, again, I would turn it back on the legislature and ask them, what is the point of that? And how is that effectively helping, you know, your local jurisdictions? And see what they have to say. Because if that's the reason, then it's a misinterpretation. Yeah,
There's also a distinction between reporting that, and I think that was Danielle's point, was actually reporting what was paid as opposed to the record-keeping requirement, which is virtually always there, and we have no problem with that at all, maintaining those records. If you need it, you've got that. It's a matter of reporting that into the database and the insecurity of many of those databases as opposed to what you've got with the state control.
Right, so you're going to have the record back at the office.
Correct.
And if somebody really needs it, they can come find it. That's why we really don't take a position on that in my agency, because we can get that answer if and when we need it.
Yeah. And we're tending to put into statutes now as best we can that the value for purposes of prosecuting is the replacement value or the original cost plus any damage done, not the scrap value, to determine whether it's a felony or misdemeanor.
Right. Well,
but if the scrapper's out on the scrap, then he has to have a value to that if he paid out the money. If he doesn't get that back, he's out that, so it'd be added onto the cost.
That is a different crime.
But he'll have that in his records.
That amount is the amount of dollars you gave the thief.
Oh, good.
You give him $94, then it's the $94.
We're at $94, but the original, the theft was, in that case, $7,000.
Right. It's two different crimes.
It's all of this, all these questions, they're all about partnerships and, you know, education and communication. And that was kind of the whole point of this exercise, was to, you know, reach out to those people in your communities, Your partners, if they're not currently good relationships, try to start over and work on that marriage. My information was up on the PowerPoint. If you didn't get it, I have some business cards up here. I don't have a ton, but I have quite a few. If there's anything I can do to help, feel free to reach out to me. I'm pretty easy to get a hold of by email. We work, because we do surveillance, we work all hours of the day and night. We're on the East Coast, but I'll surely get back to you.
I want to thank Sergeant Powell. I think it's pretty easy to see why the unit in Anne Arundel County has been successful. And like I said, a great resource for ISRI. And thank you for that. Thank you for today. I think we should have scheduled you a little bit longer. But,
there's always next year.
Remember that key word, partnership. Thank you.
All right, thank you.